There is a mistake that almost everyone makes. A mistake so deeply embedded in the way we think, so relentlessly reinforced by every motivational video, every gym poster, every speech you have ever been told to save for the hard days, that most people will never even question it. The mistake is this: you believe motivation will save you. You have been told by culture, by coaches, by content creators with ring lights and perfect jawlines that the secret to success is to want it badly enough, that if you just feel the right emotion, if you just find your why, if you just get fired up at the right moment, everything will fall into place. That is a lie, not a harmless misunderstanding, a lie. And it has cost more people more years of their lives than almost any other belief they carry. Here is what actually happens when you rely on motivation. Monday arrives. You feel it, that electric charge in your chest. You are going to change everything. You make the list, you buy the journal, you download the app, you tell someone about your plan. Thursday arrives. The feeling is gone. The list is still on the fridge, the journal has 3 entries, the app has a notification you have been ignoring, and you are sitting exactly where you sat before, only now you also feel guilty about it. This is not weakness, this is biology, and the sooner you stop blaming yourself for this cycle, the sooner you can actually escape it. This program is about what comes after motivation. It is about the architecture that high performers build quietly without fanfare that allows them to produce results on Monday the same way they produce results on Thursday, in the rain, after the argument, after the disappointment. Not because they feel like it, because they built something that does not ask how they feel. Greatness is built on what you do consistently, not what you do occasionally. Motivation gives you a spark, but consistency is the fire that never goes out. By the time you finish listening to this program, you will understand at a structural level why you have struggled to stay consistent. You will have frameworks that override your emotional state, and you will never confuse motivation with commitment again. Let us begin. Chapter 1. Motivation is an emotion. Emotions lie. To understand why motivation fails, you first have to understand what motivation actually is, not what you have been told it is, not the version that gets sold to you in 3-minute videos with dramatic music and slow-motion footage of athletes running in the rain. The real thing, the biological, psychological, neurological truth of what motivation is and what it is not. It is not a character trait. It is not a skill. It is not a gene some people are born with and others are not. It is not the secret ingredient that separates the successful from the struggling. Motivation is an emotion. That is it. That is the whole thing. An emotion, like excitement, like fear, like joy. Temporary by nature, unreliable by design, and completely outside your control in the same way that all emotions are outside your control. Specifically, motivation is a feeling of anticipated reward. Your brain, when presented with a compelling vision of the future, releases a surge of dopamine. Dopamine is the neurochemical of desire and anticipation. It is the chemical that fires when you imagine the outcome, when you picture yourself having achieved the thing, when the future feels vivid and close and real. That surge, that warmth in your chest, that electricity in your thinking, that is what we call feeling motivated. And it feels real. It feels powerful. It feels like evidence that this time will be different. But here is what neuroscience confirms and what the motivational industry will never put on a poster. Dopamine does not create action. It only creates the desire for action. Sit with that for a moment. The feeling of motivation and the act of doing the work are 2 entirely separate events. One does not automatically produce the other, and desire, without a structure, without a system to convert it into consistent behavior, evaporates. Not eventually, quickly. In approximately 72 hours, the neurochemical effect fades, the vision loses its sharpness, the future feels less urgent, and you are left exactly where you started, only now slightly more cynical about your own ability to change. Think about every time you have been genuinely motivated. The decision to get fit after seeing a photograph of yourself that you did not like, the resolution to save money after a financial scare that shook you, the burning determination to work on your craft after watching someone else succeed at the thing you know you are capable of. What happened in each case? The emotion was real, nobody is questioning that. The desire was genuine, the intention was sincere. But within days, sometimes within hours, the feeling began to cool. Life resumed its ordinary temperature. The urgency faded, and without the feeling to push you, there was nothing left to carry you forward. Because you had built your entire plan on a foundation that was always going to shift. You built it on sand, and the tide, as it always does, came in. Now here is what I need you to understand, and this is important. This pattern is not a personal failure. It is not evidence that you are lazy or weak or that you lack what it takes. Every human being on earth experiences this cycle, every single one. The difference between those who break it and those who remain trapped in it is not willpower. It is not personality. It is not even talent. It is structure. Think of motivation as an employee, a brilliant, unpredictable, completely unschedulable employee. This employee shows up randomly, sometimes first thing in the morning, energized and ready to work, sometimes not at all for days. When they show up, their work is genuinely extraordinary. They are creative, focused, unstoppable. But you cannot call them in when you need them. You cannot set their hours. You cannot put them on a consistent schedule no matter how much you need that consistency. And on the days they don't show up, nothing gets done because you built the whole operation around them. Now ask yourself honestly, would you build your entire company around an employee like that? No serious leader would, because a business built on an unreliable foundation is not a business. It's a gamble. And yet, without realizing it, most people build their lives exactly this way. Their productivity, their discipline, their growth, their progress toward the things that matter most to them, all of it contingent on whether this one unreliable employee decides to show up that morning. High performers have solved this problem, and the solution is not to find a more reliable version of motivation. The solution is to stop needing motivation to show up in order for the work to get done. They build systems. They design environments. They create rituals and schedules and accountability structures. And they do all of this with one specific intention: to make the work happen automatically, independent of their emotional state on any given day. For these people, motivation is a bonus, a welcome visitor. When it arrives, things feel easier, lighter, more energized. But when it does not arrive, the work still gets done, because the system doesn't check in with their feelings before executing. This is the first and most important shift in this entire program, from emotion-dependent action to system-dependent action. Now, let's go one level deeper, because there's a distinction here that will permanently change how you operate if you truly internalize it. Motivation is a feeling, commitment is a decision, and decisions, unlike feelings, do not expire. When you talk to elite performers across any field, athletes, executives, artists, entrepreneurs, you notice something consistent. They almost never describe their relationship to their work using the language of motivation. They don't say they feel like doing it. They don't wait until they're in the mood. They use a completely different vocabulary. Words like routine, standard, non-negotiable, identity. When you ask them directly, Do you always feel like doing this? The honest ones say, no, absolutely not. There are mornings that are hard, days that feel pointless, stretches where the inspiration is completely absent and the results feel invisible. What carries them through those days is not a feeling. It is a decision they made once, clearly, about who they are and what people like them do. And that decision, made in a moment of clarity, governs their behavior in every subsequent moment, including the hard ones. This is what we are constructing together over the course of this program, not a feeling you have to keep regenerating, not a burst of inspiration you have to keep chasing, a decision, singular, permanent, made with your full intelligence about what matters and how people who are serious about those things behave. One decision, made clearly, eliminates 1,000 future decisions. Because those future decisions, made in the moment, will always be influenced by how tired you are, how discouraged you feel, how much resistance is present. Remove those decisions from the equation entirely, and you remove motivation's ability to sabotage you. Because every single time you have to ask yourself whether you feel like doing the work today, motivation gets a vote. And motivation, as we now understand, is an unreliable, inconsistent, entirely emotion-driven voter. Stop letting it vote. Make the action non-negotiable. Lock it into the structure of your day as firmly as eating and sleeping, and then watch over the weeks and months that follow what happens to your output, your confidence, and your sense of who you are becoming. That's where we are going, and it starts with understanding what you've just learned, that motivation was never going to save you, and that's not a problem, because what comes after motivation is something far more powerful. It is a system. And systems do not have bad days. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Systems. So if motivation is out, what is in? Systems. That is the answer. Not a more powerful version of motivation, not a better playlist or a more inspiring vision board, not a stronger why. Systems. But before we talk about what a system is, let us talk about what it is not, because there is a word that gets used constantly in conversations about achievement, and it sounds like a system, but it is not. That word is goal. A goal is something you want to happen. A system is something you do consistently that makes the goal inevitable. Read that again slowly, because the difference is everything. A goal is a destination. A system is the road. And here's the brutal truth that most people discover only after years of frustration. You can want to reach a destination with every cell in your body, and if you have no road, you are not going anywhere. You are just standing at the edge of a field, staring at the horizon, wondering why the scenery never changes. The person who wants to lose weight has a goal. The person who has a 6 a.m. walk locked into their calendar, a meal preparation ritual every Sunday, and a simple rule that they do not eat after 8 in the evening, that person has a system. One of them is hoping, the other is engineering. Hope is not a strategy. It is a wish dressed in optimistic language. And wishes, no matter how sincerely felt, do not produce results. Repeated, deliberate behavior produces results. Systems produce repeated, deliberate behavior. So the question is not, what do you want? The question is, what will you do every day, regardless of how you feel, that will make what you want an inevitable outcome of time and consistency? That is the question systems answer. Now let's talk about how you actually build one, because a system is not just a habit, it's an architecture. It has specific elements that make it durable, elements that make it function on the hard days, on the uninspired days, on the days when your emotional state offers no support whatsoever. We're going to call these elements the 3 pillars, and if you build your system on all 3, you will have something that most people never have: a structure that works not because you are disciplined enough in the moment, but because the structure itself makes consistency the path of least resistance. Pillar 1. Scheduling, not deciding. There is a concept in psychology called decision fatigue. The research on this is clear and consistent. Every decision you make throughout the day draws from a finite cognitive resource. The more decisions you make, the lower the quality of your subsequent decisions. By evening, after dozens of choices, large and small, your brain is measurably worse at choosing wisely than it was in the morning. Now consider what happens when you leave your most important behaviors in the category of things you will decide about later. Every day, when the time comes, you are spending cognitive currency to answer the question, should I do this today? And that question, asked when your resources are depleted in the presence of resistance and competing demands, will frequently produce the wrong answer. The solution is to remove the question entirely. The moment a behavior is scheduled, it stops being a decision. You do not decide to eat lunch every day. You do not decide to brush your teeth. These things happen because they are embedded in the structure of your day as non-negotiables. The goal is to move your highest value behaviors, the writing, the training, the learning, the deep work, into exactly that category. On the calendar, at the same time, every day. Not when you feel ready, not when the conditions are perfect, at the time you decided in advance with full clarity before the resistance had a chance to argue. A behavior that lives in your intention is at the mercy of your mood. A behavior that lives in your calendar is at the mercy of the clock. And the clock, unlike your mood, is consistent. Pillar 2. Environment design. Your environment shapes your behavior more powerfully than your willpower. This is not a philosophical statement. It is one of the most replicated findings in behavioral science, confirmed across decades of research in psychology, economics, and public health. The foods visible on your counter influence what you eat. The books on your desk influence what you read. The apps on the front screen of your phone influence how you spend the first minutes of your morning. These are not neutral objects in a neutral space. They are cues, and cues trigger behavior before your conscious mind has even registered what is happening. This means that designing your environment is not an optional for the serious practitioner. It is a core discipline, as important as any skill you could develop. Because the environment you inhabit is constantly, silently, invisibly shaping the person you are becoming. The question is only whether you are designing it deliberately or allowing it to design you by default. Remove friction from the behaviors you want to do. If you want to read more, put the book on your pillow. If you want to exercise in the morning, sleep in your workout clothes. If you want to eat better, don't keep the alternative in the house. Add friction to the behaviors you want to reduce. Log out of the apps. Put the phone in another room. Create enough distance between the impulse and the action that your rational mind has time to intervene. Your future self will always take the path of least resistance. The only question is which path you have paved. Pillar 3. Accountability architecture. Human beings are social creatures at a neurological level. Our behavior is profoundly and measurably influenced by the real or imagined presence of other people. This is not a weakness to be ashamed of. It is wiring, ancient, powerful, and enormously useful when directed intentionally. The sophisticated performer uses this wiring as a tool. Accountability architecture has several components. The first is tracking. When you record your behavior, something important happens in your brain. The act of logging a completed workout, marking a day on a habit tracker, writing a journal entry confirming you followed through, creates a moment of reinforcement. Your brain receives a signal. This is who I am. This is what I do. And that signal, repeated daily, builds an identity. The second component is the streak. There is a psychological phenomenon called loss aversion, which simply means that the pain of losing something is significantly greater than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. Habit tracking weaponizes this in your favor. Once you have a streak of consecutive days, the prospect of breaking it becomes genuinely uncomfortable. That discomfort is motivation of a very different and far more reliable kind than inspiration. It is the motivation of not wanting to lose what you have built. The third component is social accountability. Sharing your commitments with someone whose opinion you respect changes the equation of follow-through. When the only person who knows about your commitment is you, breaking it is a social event with private consequences. When another person knows, breaking it has a social dimension. That social dimension, even when it is subtle, even when the other person never checks in, significantly increases the probability that you will follow through. Surround yourself with people whose standards pull you upward, not people who validate your excuses, people who, by the simple fact of how they operate, make your own inconsistency feel uncomfortable. Environment is not just physical, it's human, and the humans in your environment are shaping you constantly in ways you may not even notice until you look back over years and see the person you have become. Now there is one more dimension to systems that goes beyond productivity, beyond output, beyond results. Every time you act in accordance with your system, you are doing something more significant than completing a task. You are casting a vote for a particular identity. Each repetition is a piece of evidence that accumulates day by day into a self-concept that becomes nearly impossible to argue with. The person who writes 500 words every morning, even on the difficult mornings, even when the words are poor, even when no one is reading, is not just producing content, they are becoming a writer. Not because they declared it, because they proved it, to themselves, repeatedly, in the only court that ultimately matters. The goal is never just the outcome. The goal is who you become in the pursuit of the outcome. This reframe changes the entire emotional texture of the hard days. When the system asks something of you that you don't feel like giving, the question is no longer, do I feel like doing this today? The question is this who I am? And you do not negotiate with your identity. You live it. Build the system. Chapter 3: The Enemy Within, and How to Defeat It. You have a system now. You have a schedule. You have designed your environment. You have your accountability structure in place. Everything is set up. Everything is ready. And then something happens. It does not have to be something large. In fact, it is almost never something large. It is a message that lands the wrong way, a comment from someone that gets under your skin, a result that comes in below what you expected, a conversation that does not go the way you planned, something small, something that, if you described it to someone else, would sound almost embarrassingly minor. And yet, in the space of seconds, the system feels very far away. The schedule feels irrelevant. The calm, structured version of yourself that built all of that architecture feels like a stranger. And what is left in its place is something older, something faster, something that does not care about your long-term goals at all. This is the enemy within. Not laziness, not lack of ambition, not even procrastination. The real enemy is the part of your brain that was built for a world that no longer exists, reacting to a world that requires something completely different from it. Understanding this enemy is the beginning of defeating it. In the center of your brain sits a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. It has one job, and it has been doing that job for approximately 200 million years. Its job is threat detection. It scans your environment constantly, looking for anything that might harm you. And when it finds a threat, real or perceived, it triggers an immediate cascade of physiological responses. Adrenaline floods your system, cortisol rises, your heart rate increases, your vision narrows, your muscles prepare for action, and critically, the blood flow to your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, long-term planning, emotional regulation, and strategic decision-making, is partially redirected. In other words, the part of you that built the system goes partially offline, and the part of you that is 200 million years old takes the wheel. This is what researchers call an amygdala hijack. And the profound and daily problem, is that your amygdala cannot distinguish between a predator in the tall grass and a passive-aggressive email from your colleague, between a physical threat to your survival and a critical comment about your work, between genuine danger and a traffic jam that is making you late. Both register as threats. Both trigger the same cascade. Both pull you out of your rational mind and into a reactive state where your only options feel like fight, flee, or freeze. And in that state, you say the thing you cannot take back. You send the message you will regret. You abandon the work session. You reach for the distraction. You make the short-term decision that costs you in the long term. Every single time this happens and you react without choosing, you confirm a pattern. A groove is worn deeper in your neural architecture, and the next hijack becomes easier to trigger and harder to recover from. Every single time this happens and you do not react, every time you hold the space, breathe through it, and choose deliberately, you confirm a different pattern, a different groove, a different version of yourself. The space between what happens to you and how you respond is where your entire life is decided. Masters live in that space. Everyone else gets dragged out of it. So the question is not whether hijacks will happen. They will happen every day. The question is whether you have a protocol for surviving them without surrendering your clarity. That protocol is called the STOP method. 4 steps. Simple by design, because complexity fails under pressure. And if you practice these 4 steps until they become reflex, you will have something that most people spend their entire lives wishing they had. You will have the ability to choose your response to anything. Step 1. Stop. The moment you feel the emotional charge arrive, the heat in your chest, the tightening in your jaw, the sudden urgency to react, you physically stop. Not metaphorically, physically. You stop moving. You stop talking. If you are typing, your hands leave the keyboard. If you are about to speak, your mouth stays closed. You do not send the message. You do not open the door. You do not take the next step. You stop. This single act, this pause of even 2 or 3 seconds, interrupts the automatic chain of stimulus and reaction. It creates a gap, and in that gap, everything is possible. Step 2. Take a breath. Not a casual breath, a deliberate, controlled breath using a technique called box breathing. You breathe in for 4 counts, you hold for 4 counts, you breathe out for 6 counts. This is not a relaxation exercise. This is physiology. A slow, controlled exhale activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the biological counterpart to your stress response. It signals to your body that the threat has passed. Cortisol begins to drop, adrenaline begins to clear, and most importantly, blood flow returns to your prefrontal cortex. Within 30 seconds of controlled breathing, you are neurologically capable of thinking clearly again. The rational mind comes back online. You can see the situation as it actually is rather than as the amygdala has framed it. Step 3. Observe. Now, from this calmer place, you observe what is happening inside you. Without judgment, without self-criticism, you simply look at the emotion that is present and you name it. Precisely. Not, I feel bad. Precisely. I feel humiliated. I feel afraid. I feel disrespected. I feel overlooked. Research in neuroscience shows that naming an emotion with specificity, what psychologists call emotional granularity, measurably reduces its intensity. When you label what you are feeling with precision, you activate the prefrontal cortex further and reduce amygdala activity. You are not suppressing the emotion. You are not pretending it doesn't exist. You are simply putting it in its correct category. And things in their correct category lose their power to control you. You are also doing something else in this step. You are separating the facts from your interpretation of the facts. The email said the deadline was moved up. That's a fact. The email was a personal attack on my competence. That's an interpretation. And interpretations, examined clearly, often dissolve or transform entirely. Step 4. Proceed. Now and only now you choose your response, not based on the original stimulus, not based on the feeling the stimulus produced, based on your values, your strategy, and the person you have decided to become. You ask yourself one question: what does the person I am becoming do in this moment? Not what does my ego want to do, not what would feel satisfying right now. What does the person I am becoming do? That question is one of the most powerful tools you will ever use, because it removes pride from the equation. It removes the primitive need to defend or retaliate or escape. It replaces all of that with something far more useful: direction. And then you act from that direction, calmly, deliberately, as the architect of your response rather than the victim of your reaction. Practice the stop method every day. In the beginning, you will catch yourself mid-reaction, already halfway through the thing you shouldn't be doing. That's fine. Mid-reaction is better than never. Use the method there. Stop, breathe, observe, proceed, even if you are already in the middle of it. Over time, you will catch yourself at the stimulus before the reaction begins, and eventually the amygdala will barely register because you have built a circuit that intercepts it automatically. This is what emotional mastery actually looks like. Not the absence of emotion, not a life without anger, fear, or frustration, but a life in which those emotions inform you without controlling you. A life in which you feel everything and are governed by nothing. Your emotions are data. They are telling you something. They are never, under any circumstances, entitled to make your decisions for you. You are. Chapter 4. Breaking Resistance: The 5-second and 2-minute Rules. You understand now why motivation fails. You have the architecture of a system. You have the stop method for the moments when your emotions try to run the show. You are building something real, something durable. But there is one more enemy we have not fully addressed, and this one is subtle. This one does not announce itself loudly like an emotional hijack. It does not feel like anger or fear or frustration. It does not feel like an obstacle at all. It feels like reason. It sounds like, let me just finish this one thing first. It sounds like, I will start fresh on Monday when the week is clean. It sounds like, I am not quite in the right headspace for this today. I will do better work tomorrow when I am rested. It sounds perfectly logical. It sounds responsible even. And it leads somehow, always, in every case, away from the work. This is resistance. And resistance is the most sophisticated enemy you will ever face, precisely because it speaks in your own voice, using your own logic, with your own best interests apparently at heart. Resistance is the friction that exists between you and the person you are trying to become. It is not external. Nobody is putting it there. It lives inside you, generated by the same brain that is capable of your greatest work, deployed specifically to prevent that work from happening. And here's what you must understand about resistance, because this changes everything. Resistance is not evenly distributed across the task. It is concentrated almost entirely at one specific point: the beginning. The moment before you start, the threshold, that is where resistance has almost all of its power. That is where it is loudest, most convincing, most heavy, and it is almost nowhere else. The writer who has written the first sentence will write the second. The person who has laced their shoes is almost certainly going for the walk. The student who has opened the textbook to the first page will, in most cases, read it. The musician who has picked up the instrument and played the first note will play the next. Because once you are in motion, something shifts, momentum builds, focus arrives. The task, which felt enormous and forbidding from the outside, reveals itself to be simply work. Not comfortable necessarily, not easy necessarily, but manageable, doable, something you are already doing. The battle is entirely at the start. Win the start, and in most cases, you win everything that follows. So, we need two tools, both designed to defeat resistance precisely at its strongest point, the threshold. And both are deceptively simple, which is exactly why they work. The first tool is the 5-second rule. Here's the mechanism. When you feel the instinct to act on something, whether it's getting out of bed when the alarm goes off, opening the project you have been avoiding, making the call you have been postponing, or beginning the session you have been delaying, you have a window, a narrow window of approximately 5 seconds before your brain, left to its own devices, will begin constructing a reason not to. This is not a metaphor. Research on decision-making confirms that when action is not taken immediately after an instinct fires, the brain begins generating justifications for inaction almost instantly. And these justifications are convincing. They draw on real information, real fatigue, real competing priorities. They are not lies exactly. They are true things arranged strategically to produce a false conclusion. The 5-second rule interrupts this process before it can complete. The moment the instinct fires, the alarm goes off, the idea appears, the window opens, you do not think. You count backward. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you move. The countdown is not motivational. It is neurological. The physical act of counting backward interrupts the thought pattern forming in your prefrontal cortex. It is a pattern interrupt. It gives your body a direct command before your mind has had time to object, negotiate, or construct an alternative plan. You are not trying to feel ready. Feeling ready is a myth that resistance invented to keep you exactly where you are. You are not waiting for the right emotional state. You are overriding the hesitation before the hesitation can override you. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, move. Use this tool at every threshold. The moment before you sit down to do the deep work, the moment before you begin the difficult conversation, the moment the alarm goes off and the warmth of the bed is making its case, the moment you open your laptop and resistance is already suggesting you check something else first. Count down, move, and trust that momentum will meet you on the other side of the threshold, because it will, every time. The second tool is the 2-minute rule. The 5-second rule is for the sharp moments, the instants where you need to launch immediately before resistance can form its argument. The 2-minute rule is for the heavier tasks, the ones that have been sitting on your list for days, accumulating psychological weight with every hour they remain undone. You know these tasks. Everyone has them. The project that feels too large to begin, the email that requires thinking you don't feel ready to do, the creative work that demands a quality of presence you can't seem to summon. The longer these tasks sit, the heavier they become, because every day you don't begin them, resistance adds another layer to the story it is telling you about why you are not ready. The 2-minute rule dismantles that story completely, and it does so with one simple reframe. You don't commit to the task, you commit only to beginning it for exactly 2 minutes. 2 minutes of writing, 2 minutes of the workout, 2 minutes of the research, 2 minutes of the difficult conversation. Just 2 minutes, after which you have explicit, genuine permission to stop if you want to. The power of this rule is not in the 2 minutes themselves. The power is in what 2 minutes reveals. Because resistance, as we have established, lives at the threshold, not inside the task. The moment you cross the threshold, the moment you are actually doing the thing, the resistance loses most of its force. The task that felt impossible from the outside begins to feel manageable from the inside. Your brain engages, your focus sharpens. The part of you that is actually good at this work wakes up and gets involved. And 2 minutes becomes 5. 5 becomes 20. 20 becomes the full session. Not because you forced yourself, not because you summoned some extraordinary reserve of willpower, but because you were clever enough to trick resistance. You didn't promise to do the whole thing. You just promised to start, and starting was enough to make everything else possible. There is one specific form of resistance that the 2-minute rule is particularly effective against, and we need to name it directly because it is one of the most common and most costly lives of high-potential people. Perfectionism. Perfectionism presents itself as a high standard. It sounds like, I want to do this properly. It sounds like, I don't want to produce something mediocre. It sounds noble, rigorous, committed to excellence. But here's the truth about perfectionism that you need to hear clearly and remember. Perfectionism is procrastination wearing a sophisticated disguise. It is resistance that has learned to dress well, to use language that sounds like ambition while functioning exactly like avoidance. The perfectionist does not avoid work because they are lazy. They avoid beginning because beginning means producing something imperfect, and producing something imperfect feels to them worse than producing nothing at all. Which means perfectionism, left unchecked, produces exactly nothing. Done is not the enemy of perfect. Done is the prerequisite for better. The first draft is supposed to be rough. The first session is supposed to feel uncertain. The first version of anything that will eventually be great is, without exception, not great. It is a beginning, and beginnings, by definition, are imperfect. Your job is not to begin perfectly. Your job is to begin. The refinement comes from the repetitions that follow. But no repetition is possible, no improvement is possible, no mastery is possible if you are still waiting at the threshold for conditions that resistance has quietly ensured will never feel quite right enough. 2 minutes. That's all you're committing to. Open the document, write 1 sentence, put on the shoes, do 1 set, read 1 page, make 1 note. 2 minutes. And let the momentum that follows surprise you. Now, before we move on, there's something important to say about both of these tools. The 5-second rule and the 2-minute rule are not magic. They are mechanics. They work because they address the specific Chapter 5. The Communication of the Disciplined Mind. There is a dimension of personal mastery that rarely gets discussed alongside discipline and systems, and yet it is inseparable from both: communication. Not communication as a social nicety, not small talk or networking or the performance of likability. Communication as the bridge between your inner world and the outer world that responds to it. Because here is the reality that most high-performing people eventually discover, sometimes too late. You can have the sharpest mind in the room, the most disciplined habits, the clearest strategy, and still be completely invisible if you cannot make others feel what you know. Influence begins the moment you open your mouth, and it is either built or destroyed in the seconds that follow. So let us talk about how to build it. The first discipline of powerful communication is the one that sounds the simplest and is practiced the least: listening. Not the version of listening most people do, which is waiting for the other person to finish so you can say the thing you were already planning to say before they even started. That is not listening. That is patience dressed up as attention. And people feel the difference, even when they cannot name it. Real listening is an act of complete presence. It means you are not composing your response while the other person is speaking. You are not evaluating their words against your own experience. You are not waiting for the pause that signals your turn. You are genuinely, fully there, curious about what they are actually trying to communicate. Not just the words, but the meaning beneath the words, the need beneath the meaning. This quality of attention is one of the rarest things one human being can offer another. And when people receive it, they respond to it in ways that no amount of clever speaking could ever produce. They open, they trust, they feel, often without knowing why, that you are someone worth knowing. The most magnetic people in any room are almost never the loudest. They are the ones who make you feel most heard. The second discipline is the strategic question. Most people pursue influence through assertion. They make their case, they present their argument, they apply pressure and hope it produces agreement. This works sometimes, but it creates resistance at least as often as it creates alignment. There is a more elegant approach. Instead of telling people what to think, you ask them questions that lead them to think it themselves. Open questions, beginning with how, what, or why, do something that assertions cannot. They invite the other person into a process of genuine thinking rather than a process of defending. And people who arrive at a conclusion through their own thinking own that conclusion in a way they never would if you had simply handed it to them. What matters most to you about this outcome is not just a question, it's an act of respect. It signals that you are interested in their world, not just in advancing your agenda. And the answer it produces gives you information that is worth far more than anything you could have pushed them toward. Closed questions, yes or no questions, questions that telegraph your preferred answer, do the opposite. They signal that the outcome is already decided and the conversation is a formality. People feel this, even when they cannot articulate it. And people who feel managed rather than heard do not become allies, they become obstacles. Ask more than you tell, and when you ask openly. The third discipline is one that most people underestimate until they see the evidence of its absence: eye contact. When you maintain genuine, steady eye contact with another person, something happens that goes beyond technique or strategy. They trust you. Not because you have deployed a tactic, because eye contact communicates something true and something rare. It says, I am here, I see you, I am not distracted by what is behind you or what is next on my agenda. I am present in this moment with you. Averted eyes tell a completely different story, regardless of the words that accompany them. They signal distraction, insecurity. In some contexts, they signal dishonesty, whether or not dishonesty is present. The impression is formed before the conscious mind has had time to evaluate it. Comfortable, steady eye contact is built through practice, not personality. It begins with the discomfort. You hold the gaze a beat longer than feels natural. You breathe through the urge to look away. Over time, the discomfort fades. What remains is presence. And presence, as we have established, is the foundation of every meaningful connection. Now here is where everything in this chapter connects back to everything we have built before. The same discipline that makes your systems work, the ability to be fully present rather than reactive, the ability to act from strategy rather than impulse, is the exact same discipline that makes you a powerful communicator. The person who has mastered the stop method does not fire off the reactive message. They pause, they breathe, they observe, and they proceed with intention. In communication, that intention is everything. The word chosen calmly carries 10 times the weight of the word fired in reaction. The question asked with genuine curiosity opens doors that the statement made in defensiveness permanently closes. Discipline and communication are not separate skills. They are the same skill expressed in different directions. One is directed inward, governing your behavior. The other is directed outward, governing your impact. Master both, and you become someone whose presence changes the energy of a room without effort. Not because you are performing, because you are aligned. What you think, what you feel, what you say, and how you say it are all pointing in the same direction. That alignment is what people call charisma, and it has nothing to do with personality type or natural talent.
Chapter 6: Alignment and the Psychology of Wealth. We have spent this program building something internal. Discipline, systems, emotional regulation, communication, all of it directed inward toward the architecture of a more capable, more deliberate human being. Now we turn to something that most people treat as entirely external, something they believe exists out there, to be chased, competed for, and won through effort and struggle: money. And the first thing I want to say about money is this: almost everything you have been taught about how it works is incomplete, not entirely wrong, incomplete, and that incompleteness is costing you. The conventional story goes like this: you work hard, you sacrifice, you grind longer and harder than everyone around you, and eventually the accumulation of that effort produces financial reward. More input equals more output. More sweat equals more wealth. This story is partially true, and that partial truth makes it dangerous, because it leads intelligent, driven people to spend decades running harder and harder, producing more and more effort, and wondering why the results never quite match the exertion. Here is what the conventional story leaves out. Wealth is not primarily a product of effort. It is a product of alignment. Alignment between what you think, what you believe is possible for you, what you expect, and what you do. When those four things point in the same direction, financial results become almost inevitable over time. When they are in conflict, no amount of effort bridges the gap. The most important distinction in understanding this is the difference between two fundamentally different psychological frameworks. We call them the competitive mind and the creative mind. The competitive mind operates from scarcity. It believes at a deep level that there is a fixed amount of value, opportunity, and wealth in the world, a pie of finite size, and every piece someone else takes is a piece unavailable to you. This belief produces a specific set of behaviors: urgency that leads to poor decisions, resentment toward others who succeed, a constant, exhausting vigilance about your position relative to everyone around you. When you operate from a competitive mind, other people's success feels like a threat. Every person doing well in your field is evidence that the space is getting smaller. You are always measuring, always comparing, always calculating whether you are winning or losing a game that has no finish line.
The creative mind operates from a completely different premise. It understands that value is not fixed, that it can be created, expanded, and multiplied, that two people can both have more without either having less, that the question is never, how do I get what they have, but what can I create that does not yet exist? This framework produces entirely different behaviors. Patience, because you are not racing against anyone else's clock. Collaboration, because other people's success is no longer a threat, but a signal of what is possible. And a quality of thinking that is genuinely expansive, capable of seeing opportunities that the contracted, scarcity-focused mind is too anxious to notice. The transition from competitive to creative is not a switch you flip once. It is a daily practice of catching the scarcity thought, examining it honestly, and replacing it with an abundance question. It is slow work, but it is the most financially consequential work you can do. Now let us talk about gratitude, because gratitude and wealth is a relationship that sounds, to many people, like the language of wishful thinking. So let us remove the sentiment and look only at the mechanism. Chronic dissatisfaction, the constant mental focus on what is lacking, what has not arrived, what others have that you do not, produces a specific neurological state, threat sensitivity. Your brain, when operating in a persistent state of lack, devotes significant processing resources to scanning for danger and confirming the feeling of insufficiency. This state is not only exhausting, it is strategically blinding. You cannot see opportunity clearly when your nervous system is operating in permanent deficit mode. Practiced gratitude, the deliberate and habitual direction of attention toward what is working, what has been built, what is already present, produces a measurably different neurological state. The threat system quiets, creative thinking activates, pattern recognition improves. You begin to see connections and possibilities that were always there but completely invisible to the anxious, contracted mind. This is the mechanism. Gratitude is not a response to success, it is a condition that makes success more neurologically accessible. You are not pretending things are better than they are. You are training your brain to operate in the state that is most capable of producing the results you want. The final thing to understand about wealth is this. Most people make poor financial decisions not because they lack information, but because they are playing a game they have never explicitly defined. They are saving for the long term using a short-term emotional framework. They are comparing their financial choices to people operating in completely different contexts with completely different goals. They are measuring their progress against a standard they never consciously chose. Define your game explicitly. What are you building and over what time horizon? What does enough look like for the life you actually want to live, not the life you feel you were supposed to want? What are the principles that will govern your financial decisions regardless of what the people around you are doing? When your game is defined, comparison becomes irrelevant. You are not competing with anyone else's timeline or anyone else's metrics. You are running your race on your terms toward your specific destination. And here's what ties everything together. The discipline to define your game and play it consistently. The emotional regulation to make financial decisions from clarity rather than fear. The communication skills to create and exchange value with others. The systems that ensure your financial behaviors happen regardless of your mood on any given day. Wealth is not separate from everything we have built in this program. It is the natural output of it. Alignment is not a financial strategy. It is a way of being. And when your way of being is disciplined, clear, and directed, money is simply one of the things that follows. We have covered a great deal of ground together. You now understand that motivation is an emotion, unreliable, temporary, and a dangerous foundation for anything serious.
You have the architecture of systems, the three pillars that make consistency possible independent of how you feel on any given day. You have the stop method for the moments when your emotions try to make decisions that belong to your rational mind. You have the 5-second rule and the 2-minute rule to defeat resistance at its strongest point. You have the communication disciplines that turn your inner clarity into outer impact. And you understand that wealth is not the product of grinding harder, but the natural output of a mind in alignment. That is a complete framework for a different kind of life, and none of it means anything if you do not use it today. This is the part nobody wants to hear, because it is easier to keep consuming, to listen to one more program, read one more book, watch one more video, and feel the temporary satisfaction of learning without the discomfort of changing. Knowledge without application is the most sophisticated form of procrastination, and you are too intelligent and have come too far in this program to fall for it. In the next 24 hours, there will be a moment where resistance appears at the threshold of something that matters, where the emotional hijack tries to take the wheel, where the old pattern invites you back into its familiar comfort. That is your moment. Not next Monday, not when the circumstances improve, not when you feel more ready. That moment, today, is where everything either starts or does not start. Count down from 5 and move. Give it 2 minutes. Use the stop method before you react. Build one system, just one, that will run tomorrow whether or not you feel like it. Do that today, then do it again tomorrow. Not because you are motivated, because you decided. The death of motivation is not a loss. It is the moment you stop needing it. The moment you become someone who is governed not by feeling, but by structure, identity, and decision. That person was always in you. Now, go be them.